There is a place on this earth that has never known sunlight, not in a billion years, not in four, not once, in all the long turning of geological time, has a single photon of light pierced its darkness. It sits beneath miles of ocean, beneath crushing pressure that would collapse the hull of any submarine ever built, beneath silence so absolute that even the concept of sound feels foreign there. We call it the Hadal Zone, from the Greek god of the underworld, Hades, the realm of the dead. But here's the thing that should stop you cold. It is not dead. Far from it. Something lives down there. Many things, in fact, things that should not exist by any rule of biology we once believed. Things that feast in darkness, that breathe without air, that move through pressure that would crush a human body into something unrecognizable. Things that have evolved in total isolation for millions upon millions of years, shaped by conditions so alien that studying them feels less like marine biology and more like preparing for a contact with another world. This is not a story about what we have mapped. This is a story about the edge of what we know and the vast, breathing darkness that lies just beyond it. For most of human history, the deep ocean was simply the end of the world. Ancient sailors believed sea monsters lurked in the abyss. Creatures of impossible size coiled beneath the surface, waiting. The Norse called it the Kraken. The Greeks drew sea serpents at the edges of their maps. Even those who had spent their entire lives on the water, who could read the wind and navigate by stars, refused to believe that anything below the waves was worth understanding. The ocean was not a place. It was a boundary. Cross it, and you fell off the edge of the known. When the HMS Challenger set out in 1872, the first true oceanographic expedition in the modern scientific age, the men aboard carried with them centuries of assumption, chief among them, that the deepest parts of the ocean were lifeless. Biologist Edward Forbes had theorized just decades earlier that below 300 fathoms, roughly 550 meters, life simply could not exist. He called it the abiotic zone, the lifeless zone, a depth of absolute silence, absolute cold, absolute death. Forbes was wrong. But it would take nearly a century to fully understand just how wrong he was. When the Challenger's crew lowered weighted lines down into the Pacific, deeper than anyone had measured before, they pulled them back up and found, clinging to the instruments impossibly, inexplicably, life. Sediment teeming with creatures, organisms no human eye had ever seen. Forbes's abiotic zone was not a void. It was a world. Picture, for a moment, what it means to descend. You begin at the surface, sunlit, warm, churning with familiar life. Schools of fish move like silver shadows through curtains of filtered light, the surface world, the world we know. And then you go down. At 200 meters, the sunlight fades. The blue deepens. The warmth drains from the water, the way warmth drains from a room when someone opens a window in winter. Below this threshold, the twilight zone, bioluminescent creatures begin to glow. Strange, ghostly lanternfish. Translucent jellyfish trailing filaments like living silk. The first hints that the rules are changing. At 1,000 meters, you enter the midnight zone. Total darkness. What little light exists here is not from above, but from within. Creatures that manufacture their own cold fire, their own dim, eerie luminescence, like lanterns carried by travelers in a cave that has no end. At 4,000 meters, you touch the abyssal plain, the ocean floor in its most common expression. Flat, vast, covered in fine sediment that drifts down like the slow fall of snow. It is one of the largest ecosystems on Earth. It is almost entirely unexplored. And then there are the trenches, the places where the ocean floor does not simply stop, but opens, cracks in the skin of the planet, wounds in the earth so deep, so narrow, so ancient that they feel less like geography and more like scars. The Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, the Kermadec, deep gashes carved where tectonic plates collide, and one slides beneath the other, dragging the ocean floor with it into the mantle of the earth itself. The deepest of these, the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, southwest of Guam, reaches a depth of approximately 10,935 meters, nearly 11 kilometers, straight down. To put that in human scale, if you place Mount Everest at the bottom of Challenger Deep, its summit would still rest more than 2 kilometers beneath the waves. The entire height of the highest mountain on Earth would not fill this wound. For years, scientists assumed this was where life ended entirely. The pressure at 10,000 meters is approximately 1,100 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. 1,100 times. The weight of the ocean above pressing down on every square centimeter with force that compresses water itself. No air, no light, near freezing temperatures hovering just above the point where salt water crystallizes into ice, and a chemical environment shaped by the geological violence happening just beneath the seafloor. Hydrothermal seepage, the slow release of toxins and minerals leaching up from the collision of tectonic plates. It was inconceivable that anything could survive there. It was inconceivable. And yet, in 1960, naval officer Don Walsh and explorer Jacques Picard sealed themselves inside a vessel called a Trieste, a bathyscaphe, a deep-sea submersible designed not for comfort but for survival, and began to descend into Challenger Deep. It took them nearly 5 hours to reach the bottom. 5 hours of utter darkness, of steel groaning under pressure, of the ocean pressing in from all sides. When they arrive at the bottom, they turn on the external floodlights, and there, in the silt of the deepest place on Earth, something moved. It was a flatfish, or something that resembled one. A creature adapted so completely to an impossible environment that it had become almost unrecognizable. It lay on the sediment and it moved. It was alive, at the bottom of the world, in the place where no life should exist. Walsh and Picard looked at each other in the cramped, cold interior of the Trieste, and did not speak for a moment. There are no words recorded from that silence, but one can imagine what it felt like. The floor falling out from beneath everything you thought you knew. The abyss was not empty. It had never been empty. We had simply never looked. What lives 10,000 meters beneath the ocean? The answer is stranger than any myth our ancestors invented. There are the Hadal amphipods, small, translucent crustaceans that look almost delicate, almost fragile, pale as bone china, with long feathery antennae that sweep the water for the scent of food. They exist in colonies of extraordinary density. When organic material falls in the world above, a dead whale, a fragment of wood, anything, it drifts downward for days, for weeks, descending through all those layers of darkness, slowing, cooling, until it finally settles on a Hadal floor. And the amphipods come, in swarms, in thousands. They strip a carcass to nothing in hours. They are the janitors of the deepest world, the final decomposers, the last link in a food chain that begins in sunlight and ends in total darkness. There are sea cucumbers, holothurians, that move across the Hadal floor in long, slow, ribbon processions. Some are translucent, their internal organs visible through their skin as they crawl. Some are so adapted to pressure that when brought to the surface, they simply dissolve, their tissues unable to maintain their structure without the crushing weight of the ocean holding them together. They are creatures made of pressure, creatures that the surface world literally destroys. There are snailfish, members of the family Leparidae, who hold a record as the deepest dwelling vertebrates ever documented. They were filmed at 8,336 meters in the Japan Trench in 2022, a record that stood only briefly before new expeditions pushed the boundary deeper still. They are ghostly, almost translucent. Their skulls are not fully fused, an adaptation that allows the pressure to move through them rather than crush them. They have no swim bladder, the air-filled organ that most fish use to control buoyancy, because at these depths, air itself would implode. They navigate darkness by lateral line, a sensory system that detects the movement of water, the pressure of displaced molecules, the faintest tremor of something living nearby. They cannot live anywhere else. The surface is as lethal to them as the depths would be to us. They are prisoners of their environment and masters of it. And then there are the things that are harder to name. Xenophyophores, single-celled organisms that grow to the size of dinner plates. Single-celled, one cell, the size of a human hand, living on a Hadal floor, feeding on sediment, processing the slow rain of organic matter that drifts down from the sunlit world above. They are among the largest individual cells known to science. They defy every textbook diagram of cellular biology. There are polychaete worms threading through the sediment, foraminifera, amoebas and shells, building intricate calcium structures on the floor. Bacteria, and here is where it becomes genuinely startling, bacteria that do not breathe oxygen, bacteria that use sulfur or iron or methane as their fuel, chemolithotrophs, creatures that have entirely decoupled themselves from the sun. They do not need photosynthesis. They do not need the surface. They have built their entire metabolic architecture around the chemical energy released by the geological processes happening in the rock beneath them. They are not surviving despite their environment. They are thriving because of it. But it is the hydrothermal vents that shatter everything. Not all of the deep ocean is cold. Not all of it is still. In 1977, a team of scientists aboard the research vessel Nor, working in the Galapagos Rift, a spreading center where two tectonic plates pull apart, lowered a submersible, and found something that would fundamentally rewrite the story of life on Earth. Vents. Hydrothermal vents. Cracks in the seafloor where superheated water, heated by the magma just beneath, blasts upward into the freezing deep ocean. The water coming out of these vents reaches temperatures of 400 degrees Celsius, hot enough that it would instantly boil on the surface. But at these depths, the pressure is so immense that the water remains liquid, a superheated, mineral-rich plume rising through the darkness like smoke from a chimney. Around these vents, in an environment of extreme heat, extreme pressure, extreme chemical toxicity, the scientists found an entire ecosystem, a complete, thriving, astonishing ecosystem that had never been described, never been imagined, never been predicted. Tube worms 2 meters long, their feathery red plumes waving in the current of heated water. Clams the size of dinner plates, clustered around the vent openings. White crabs moving over rocks encrusted with bacteria. Mussels, shrimp, anemones, a community of life, complex, layered, interdependent, in a place that received no sunlight whatsoever. None of it ran on sunlight. All of it ran on the heat and chemistry of the Earth itself. The primary producers in this ecosystem were not plants. They were bacteria. Chemosynthetic bacteria that converted the hydrogen sulfide pouring from the vents into chemical energy, the same way surface plants convert sunlight. The tube worms hosted billions of these bacteria inside their bodies, living in a symbiotic relationship so intimate that the worm had no digestive system of its own. It had surrendered its gut entirely to its bacterial partners. It was not one organism. It was a community wearing the shape of one. What the scientists found at the Galapagos Rift was not just a new species, or even a new ecosystem. It was a new paradigm, a new answer to the question, what does life require? We had always answered, sunlight, water, the right chemistry, the right temperature. The vents whispered back, you only needed water, you only needed chemistry, you only needed energy in some form, any form. Sunlight was never the requirement. It was just our local solution. And if that is true, if life does not require sunlight, then the universe opens in ways that are almost too large to hold in the mind. We have now mapped less than 20% of the ocean floor. Less than 20%. The moon is more thoroughly charted. Mars has been photographed in higher resolution than the majority of Earth's seafloor. The greatest unexplored wilderness on our own planet is the one we are standing on. Hidden beneath the surface we sail, the water we fish, the storms we track. The Hadal trenches represent a fraction of that 20%, a fraction of a fraction. We have dropped instruments into the Mariana Trench a handful of times. We have conducted full ocean depth dives with crewed submersibles fewer times than humans have walked on the moon. What we have found in those rare descents has been transformative. New species discovered on nearly every expedition. Creatures carrying microplastics in their bodies. Yes, even here, at the deepest point on Earth, the fingerprints of human industry have arrived before our instruments. Amphipods collected from the Challenger Deep in 2014 were found to contain persistent organic pollutants at concentrations higher than those found in the most polluted rivers in China. The abyss, that most remote of all places, has not escaped us, and yet it keeps its secrets. Every expedition returns with more questions than answers. Creatures that dissolve before they can be brought to the surface. Chemical signals that suggest the presence of organisms we have never sampled. Acoustic phenomena, sounds from the Hadal depths that have no identified source. In 2014, NOAA hydrophones recorded a strange, complex, repeating sound from the Western Pacific, a sound that took years to analyze and was ultimately identified as a newly described call of the Antarctic minke whale. But for those years, it was called a bioduck, and no one knew what made it. The deep ocean produces sounds we cannot yet attribute, movements we cannot yet explain. It is a world that is revealing itself to us slowly, reluctantly, on its own terms. There is something that happens to the scientists who study the deep ocean, something that is not purely intellectual. Ask any of them, and they will pause before answering, as though looking for words that don't quite exist yet. Robert Ballard, who found the wreck of the Titanic and has spent decades exploring the deep, has said that the experience of descending into the abyss changes how you think about the surface world. Everything up here, the cities, the noise, the light, the urgency of human time, becomes briefly incomprehensible. Down there, in that silence, time moves differently. Geological time, evolutionary time, a time measured not in years, but in the slow accumulation of sediment, the drift of tectonic plates, the patient transformation of one species into something entirely new. The Mariana Trench formed roughly 180 million years ago. The organisms living in it have been evolving in isolation for millions of years, cut off from the rest of the ocean by the steep walls of the trench, adapting to its specific chemistry, its specific pressures, its specific darkness. They are not the same as the organisms in the Philippine Trench or the Kermadec. Each trench is its own island of evolution, its own separate world, its own unique answer to the question of how to survive. There's something almost unbearably moving about this, that while we were building civilizations on the surface, while we were inventing writing and war and mathematics and music, below us, in the dark, life was quietly doing what life always does, adapting, enduring, finding a way, without us, without any knowledge of us, without any need for us at all. Here is what the deep ocean teaches us. If we are willing to listen, life is not fragile. We have told ourselves this story, that life requires a narrow band of conditions, that it is precious and precarious and easily extinguished. And there is truth in that at the level of individual organisms, individual species. But at the level of life itself, of the phenomenon of organized chemistry turning energy into complexity and complexity into consciousness, life is not fragile. Life is aggressive. Life is inventive. Life will colonize a volcanic vent at the bottom of the ocean. Life will fill a trench with creatures that breathe sulfur and live in the dark. Life will compact itself into a single cell the size of a hand and persist for decades on the slow rain of organic matter from a world it has never seen. Life is, in some sense, inevitable given energy, given chemistry, given time. And that recognition, that quiet, staggering recognition, changes the way we look at the universe beyond our own ocean. There are oceans beneath the ice of Europa, Jupiter's moon. There are subsurface oceans suspected beneath the surface of Enceladus, Saturn's moon. Oceans in total darkness. Oceans under crushing pressure. Oceans heated, perhaps, by tidal forces from the gravity of their parent planets. The same way our own deep-sea vents are heated by geological processes in Earth's interior. We have now shown that oceans like these can support life. Not just simple life. Complex life. Ecosystems. Food chains. Adaptation and evolution and interdependence. If what we have found at 10,000 meters beneath our own ocean is any guide, then the universe is not the cold, empty, lifeless expanse we once imagined. It is teeming. It is dark and cold and crushing, but it is teeming. The question is no longer whether life can survive in the depths. We know it can. The question, the one that sits quietly at the center of everything, is what else is down there? What have we not yet seen? What moves through those cold black corridors of rock and sediment that no human eye has ever reached? What songs, if they could be called that, echo through the Hadal dark? What vast, slow drama of predation and survival and chemical transformation is playing out right now in the deepest places on the only world we have ever called home? The ocean floor does not care whether we are watching. It has its own business. It has always had its own business. We are the newcomers here. We are the creatures who arrived late, who named the depths after death, who assumed silence meant emptiness. We were wrong. And the correction of that error, the slow, patient, humbling correction of that error, is one of the great ongoing stories of what it means to be human, to reach into the dark and find it full, to descend into the place we call the underworld and discover it was not death at all. It was simply life without us, life that never needed the sun, life that never needed our permission. And if we are very quiet, if we turn off our instruments and our noise and our certainties, we might still hear it, that deep, slow breathing of a world we have barely begun to understand, 10,000 meters below, waiting, as it has always waited, patient as stone, alive as fire. The ocean does not give up its secrets to the fearful. It gives them to those who are willing to descend. Consider what else lies waiting. In the dark we have not yet reached.